Chapter 100. They barely had time to say thanks and bye to Instructor Fragment. As soon as their feet hit the ground, students from the next group were jogging up, and their group was supposed to be jogging off to their own second session. Everly was staggering ahead of Alden and Con. She was clutching her shoes in her hand, and her hair buns had mostly unraveled. "I saved her all by myself, greater than," she said in Korean when she spotted Constantine. "I told you I could. Greater than. You were magnificent. Like an ice spider." She frowned. "A spider?" "A beautiful spider," he said. "But why was your bag a girl?" "I was imagining it was my mom. So that I wouldn't drop it." When Alden had heard they would have class time dedicated to practicing maneuvering and positioning, he had imagined a lot of talking would happen, and then maybe a quick exercise. But he was starting to suspect that the philosophy of their gym instructors was going to be a learn while doing one. Instead of giving a long lecture, Instructor Marion was periodically talking in their ears through system combs and telling them what to think about and what mistakes they'd just made. Half the gym had been given over to this class, and obstructions had been created out of the magic shields that could be used to segment the gym into dueling blocks. They'd been made opaque, and they stood in tall columns and walls, creating a maze filled with tons of blind spots. Alden stood with Astrid, trying not to gasp for air. He was afraid that breathing too hard would give away their position. Both of them were wearing green vests over their gym suits, and they had their backs pressed to a column. The other green vests were their teammates for this exercise, the hunted. The red vests were their enemies, the hunters. The hunted gained a point for every 20 seconds they went without being spotted. The hunters stole one of those points every time they spotted someone. "It's simple," Instructor Marion had said in that pleasant voice of his. "It's so simple that most of you will have little use for your magic. A spell effect will usually give away your position. You cannot scale the obstacles. There is no combat. Apologies, Alden, but this time there's no ground element. We'll play with it later. Here most of you have nothing but your wits. And of course your stats. You're supposed to be using your talents heavily in the other sections. Think of this game as a fun breather. Fun breather, my ass." It had been 20 minutes of flat-out sprints to reposition himself behind a safe obstruction, where he would stand for just a few seconds before Max would, Alden and Astrid, go down the corridor to your right at the signal. A high-pitched yelp came from the light shaper's direction a moment later. Presumably he was both signaling and providing a distraction to pull away the hunter who'd been running toward Alden and Astrid. They left the column behind and fled down the corridor. Everly, wearing a red vest, was standing right there as they emerged. She pointed at them excitedly, then spun around to press her face to the column behind her, like the person who was in a game of hide-and-seek. Hunters who'd just gotten a point had to close their eyes and count down to let the hunted get away again. "Shit," Astrid whispered as 2 points disappeared from their team's score. They were barely keeping it above 0 thanks to Constantine's efforts on behalf of the other team. His legs were definitely not tired enough from climbing up and down the scaffolding. When they first got started, he'd been excited and he'd said he was going to try to use his object reading skill to detect where people had recently been standing on the gym floor. But either that had been too slow, his skill was too low level to do a wide enough area, or the magic floor wasn't particularly readable. Because he'd shifted tactics and was instead pelting through the gym like an S-rank lunatic, whipping his neck back and forth rapidly to catch glimpses of green. Alden wasn't sure he was even blinking. "Everly saw us," Alden reported to Max. "She's at the end of the corridor you sent us down." "Sorry," Max texted back. "Nobody has sighted her in a while, so I didn't know what area she was in." He was doing really well at remembering the layout of all the visibility obstructors and, usually, the positioning of most members on both teams. Con's squirrel-like habit of spontaneously changing directions had made Max curse in 3 different languages at one point, though. "Astrid and I are splitting up. I'm heading," before he could finish texting, Astrid darted off back the way they'd come. "I'm heading toward the bathrooms," he finished. "East," said Max. "Bathrooms is simpler, dude." Astrid suddenly texted, "Scarf folder." Master read. I do run. The others were using finger texting, but the shapeshifter had claimed she wouldn't be outdone by Max and Alden and would be sticking with mental. Thus, some interpretation was required. Alden stared at the words. I think she means she just spotted the red team's Meister in the direction of the scaffolding. The Meister must not have spotted her, though, since they hadn't lost another point. Alden crept along a wall, then sprinted through an intersection where he could potentially be spotted from too many directions. He stopped beside another obstacle. A moment later, he heard rapid footsteps approaching. Is that you behind the obelisk, Alden? Max asked. It's me. The other B-rank stepped around to join him. He was breathing hard, too. Max held up both hands with his fingers spread to indicate a 10-second rest, then he went back to directing their teammates and collecting enemy locations through the chat. Raccoons. Astrid said, just as they were about to sprint again. Raccoons? Max mouthed. Do you mean bathrooms? Is contoured the bathrooms from where you are? Typo. Sad face. I do run. I think she was just thinking about raccoons and she accidentally typed that, Alden whispered. Max sighed and dashed away. Line of asterisks. They had a 3-minute water and bathroom break at the end of Instructor Marion's session. Alden felt like someone had sucked the oxygen from the room and the energy from his muscles. The bodily awareness word chin was still in effect. It would fade at the beginning of his last session, self-defense. For now, though, he was feeling every spot on his body that had gotten a workout today. And it's all of them. All of the move Alden around spots are tired. At this rate, only his face was going to have strength left in it. He'd have to try talking people into not hitting him for self-defense. His skill was great for defense of course, but by his rough estimation, level 3 bearer of all burdens should be approaching depletion by now. The long, extended court preservation had been unexpectedly taxing. He was guesstimating that he could have done most of what he'd done in the rescue session in some fashion, and probably he'd make it through the majority of offense. But that should be about it. If he followed his own plan and handicapped himself right now, the high cost of double running bearer would exhaust his authority in the expected time frame. It's not like it's a real waste to do it. Learning to take care of myself when my skill's gone, or when I'm using it to preserve something tiny or precious that's useless as a shield is good. And learning to double run it is important, too. He collapsed onto a bleacher. Everyone was taking their break now. He saw Hoyu jogging across the gym toward him, looking fresh as a daisy. I want your stamina stats, Alden said as soon as he drew close. Give them to me. They only make it take longer for my body to get tired right now. My brain is still fuzzy from not getting any sleep last night. And I already blew out my boxing glove skill. He sat down beside Alden and beamed when Everly passed him one of the iced towels she had made. Alden was watching Maricel. Instructor Fragment had pulled her aside and was talking animatedly while manipulating the potting soil Maricel had chosen to use for class today. It looks kind of like they're talking about how she can make floating stairs. Maricel looked focused and intrigued. Everyone's so cool, aren't they? Hoyu said. I saw your thing. With the sandbag rescue. Like a balloon. Big Snake stared at it, too. For about 3 seconds. Then he went back to hitting everyone. Did you see Everly's ice rope? Alden asked. No. Hoyu whipped around to look at her. What did you do with an ice rope? Khan leaped at the opportunity to praise her. During the break, they all got a surprise. It was one most of the class felt was negative, judging by the sounds of distress Alden heard echoing around him. Gym class has written homework? The boy Alden had seen running around the party wearing a caution tape belt asked. Of course there's homework, Vandy replied. She was using her powers to fan herself, and the tail of her braid was blowing around. Why wouldn't there be? This is a lot of homework, though. Heloisa was upside down, practicing handstands. It's a ton. Are you looking at it, Windy Woman? Reinhard asked. He was casting some kind of spell over his practice arrows. But there's supposed to be a lot of homework, Vandy said. She's right, Hoyu agreed, looking around at everyone. All of the gym courses will have homework. It would be a waste of the facility for the instructors to focus too much on lecturing and theory while we're in here. This is the practical half of the course, where we're supposed to be pushing our powers and our physical abilities as much as we can. So the other half of the course happens outside the gym. He and Vandy both had parents who'd attended either the high school or university hero programs, so they would know. Alden was studying the assignments. For the rescue section, they were supposed to listen to a recorded lecture and review the drone footage of their own rescues. Then they had to come to class on Wednesday with new things to try. For maneuvering, there was a self-evaluation of today's performance due on Wednesday, and there was a book that had to be read by the end of next week. For self-defense and offense, they'd be given individual assignments based on their strengths and weaknesses. It was a lot, but what Hoyu had said made sense. The gym wasn't really a place where it was reasonable for them all to sit around pondering and talking, so that had to be done separately. And this was a 3-day-a-week class. 6 hours a week of pure practical work, he thought. This looks like about the same amount of homework to go with it, assuming defense and offense aren't ridiculous. Torsten Klein's voice suddenly rang across the gym. 2 minutes. Finish up whatever you're doing, and head to your next instructor. You're my next instructor. Alden was nervous about it for multiple reasons. Hey, Hoyu. You did offense already with the all-brute group. Any advice on weapon selection? He grinned. Massive fireballs. A nuclear detonation. Cried Eloisa, righting herself. That's what it'll take to knock out Instructor Klein. Trust me. Your umbrella is not fast enough. Nothing I can do is fast enough to catch up to a professional Ajibrute. I was just wondering about strategy in general. There was a thud behind him as Mehdi leaped down from a higher bleacher. A professional Ajibrute. Do you think a B-rank rabbit could even beat me? I haven't bothered to consider it, Alden said absently, still staring across the gym at Klein. I just have to pick a weapon for the rest of term by Friday, and I don't want to waste today trying out something completely wrong. Oh, they are making you choose just one thing? Hoyu looked disappointed. That's not as much fun. Pick the umbrella. We're doing duels starting week after next. I want to fight the umbrella again. Stop going on about that stupid umbrella, Eloisa, Mehdi snapped. If I were you, I'd be embarrassed I couldn't crumple a B-rank's comedy shield like paper. He stalked away. Ops. I pissed him off somehow, Eloisa said. Then she shrugged. He's probably still mad that I would definitely have beaten him at the drinking contest if Astrid had made enough bonding potion for us to fight to the death. She adjusted her ponytail then trotted after him. Hoyu leaned toward Alden. I'm pretty sure it was you who made him mad. What did I do? He was trying to say, Roar, I'm better than you. And you said, I don't even know who you are. Alden laughed. I did not. Hoyu nodded. You did. Alden looked at Mehdi's retreating back. He still shouldn't have insulted my umbrella. It wasn't for comedy. I thought about it. It was lightweight, not so oversized that I would trip over it, extendable. I could rapidly make 2 different easily usable shapes out of it, and it had a wrist strap. So that I wouldn't drop it. You could shield a real shield, couldn't you? If you wanted. Sure. But it would be so much harder to move around with. And if my skill gives out, then there's no point in me hauling a big hunk of metal or wood around the gym. It'll offer protection against a few things, but the more likely outcome is that it slows me down, someone snatches it, thanks me for the gift, and then beats me to death with it. He stood up. If I lose my shield, it's not the worst thing for it to turn back into something useless for everyone else around me. Would you come over to my duffel with me? I want to change my paracord weapon. And pick up my handicap. It was going to be a small breath mint. He'd bought a pack of them to try to untorture his garlicky, oversensitive tongue. It hadn't worked, but if he preserved one and ate it, well, there was no way of dropping that kind of preserved object. He'd lay it beside the cord when he asked Hoyu to entrust it. Range, Hoyu said. What? I was answering your question more seriously. You need some way to attack from range. Instructor Klein is only running away, not fighting back. So don't worry about protecting yourself at all and go for range. Thanks for the tip. Are you really going to make a zip line? What? I heard someone say you were going to make one next time. Can I ride it? Sure. If you can get the faculty to let you and if gym death doesn't upset you. Line of asterisks. Superheroes have to go on the attack frequently, Instructor Klein said. Instructor Waker will be teaching you what it's like to face someone who is willing to engage you in combat. I will be teaching you what it's like to deal with someone who isn't. Everly raised her hand with a nervous look. Are you going to ask why we would fight someone who wasn't fighting back? She blushed and nodded. He smiled at her. A question that shows good character. However, I'm not talking about attacking someone who has yielded. I'm talking about dealing with dangerous people who have harmed others, who will likely do so again, and who have no desire to stick around and fight back when another powerful avowed arrives to bring them to justice. Runners, said Astrid. Klein nodded. Runners, hiders, hostage takers. Sometimes allowing a criminal avowed to flee is the correct choice. Perhaps your powers are a terrible match. Or you deem it likely that a pursuit will endanger more lives than the criminal themselves will if they are allowed to leave. But in most cases, it's better to swiftly and efficiently deal with the enemy while they are in front of you. Allowing an escape is just making future victims and future problems for yourself or another hero to handle. He speared them with his eyes. Remember, an active duty superhero is almost always the most powerful solution that will be thrown at a problem avowed. Above you, there is only well-orchestrated military action, a hyperbole, or one of our battle groups. And a lot of innocent people have to die before the cogs turn and the authorities bring those options to bear for the sake of a single villain. The enemy is the question. You must strive to be the answer. He likes giving speeches, I think. Admittedly, it was a good speech. Alden was trying to stand still and attentive without looking like he was standing at actual military attention. He kept worrying that Klein was about to call him out, as a time waster, a weakling, someone who did not really belong. If it happened he'd already decided he was just going to grin and bear it, but he was still dreading it. Constantine. The instructor barked. Ah. What? Con said, looking around frantically. Everyone else had jumped at the sudden increase in volume, too. How do you attack? Instructor Klein asked in a more normal tone. I hope that in the future, let the faculty worry about your future. In this space, it's your job to work with what you already possess, so that you can learn and grow quickly. We develop the talents you have fully, and because of that you'll naturally gain new ones. So if an enemy appears before you at this very moment, how do you attack? Con grimaced. With my fists. Good. Instructor Wu, take Constantine aside and show him how to throw a decent punch. They all turned in surprise to see that Wu and Foxbolt were behind them. Siren. The light shaper flinched. How do you attack? I can make places hot. If I have long enough. Instructor Klein coughed. You sound distressed about that. I know it's not. Your powers and Constantine's are not presently useful for attacking. However, the benefit of that is that you can both practice them to their fullest and at your leisure without worrying about seriously harming yourselves or destroying anything. Many of your classmates would relish the opportunity. We expect you to take advantage of it. Extensively. You have other strengths as a superhuman. For now, go join Instructor Wu and learn to throw a punch. Instructor Klein continued down the line, asking everyone how they attacked. It soon became apparent that the scary voice he used to shout their names was his version of a joke, since it was almost always followed up with advice delivered more affably. He only fumbled momentarily when Astrid asked if she could try to deal with a villain by looking like their mom to catch them off guard then punching them. Well, I'll be playing the villain today. Can you shift into an approximation of my mother? He asked finally. Does she look a lot like me? Not remotely. Oh. Then not yet. He saved Alden for last. The others were all off having quick practice sessions by themselves or with instructors Foxbolt and Wu. Alden. I didn't get the angry joke voice. He felt a tiny bit disappointed. Klein seemed strict but also like he was a dedicated teacher. The ideal thing would have been if both of them could have pretended like the "you done" single quote along at the school speech hadn't been spoken or heard. What are you trying out for your attacks today? Paracord with a 5-kilo bag on the end, Alden said. He only had a few feet looped around his wrist. The bulk of the cord was around the bag so that he could try a different unraveling method. He also had a preserved mint in his stomach. Funny how none of my heroic visions for myself as a kid ever included eating my own magic. Do you know how to use it? The instructor asked, examining bag and cord. I don't. But I'm here to figure that out. After a pause, Instructor Klein said, given the nature of your skill, rope is an important tool to master. It's something you will benefit from practicing with, so I have no objection to you choosing it as your weapon for the offensive portion of this course. Then he turned to call the others back together. Could have been worse, Alden decided. He glanced over at Kahn, who'd just come to stand beside him. The adjuster was frowning at his own clenched fists. I think my thumbs are too long. I have long thumbs. They look standard to me, said Alden. Do they? I just spent several minutes thinking about how to make a perfect fist, and now I'm sure there's something wrong with them. Everyone. Instructor Klein barked. He smiled when half of them jumped again. Your only job today is to hit me with something that can put me out of commission. A kill shot, a capture, knocking me unconscious. You're going to have enough trouble as it is, so don't feel limited. The rules are, I can go anywhere in the gym I want, you can use your powers however you want, no teamwork, and no stopping. It's the second half of class. If you've been pushing yourself as you should have, then a lot of you should be approaching fatigue with your main talents. When they give out, you don't get to quit for the day. Running is good for you. No teamwork? Surprisingly, it was Max who asked. The instructor looked at him. Not today. No planning with your classmates. No interfering with them for the sake of interfering with them either. Treat what everyone else is doing like mayhem happening in the midst of your own solo attempt to stop a dangerous criminal as quickly as possible. Use their actions or their magic if they can be a resource to you. Avoid them if they're an obstacle. Your friends aren't civilians, villains, or fellow heroes for this exercise, they are just complicating features of the environment you're fighting in. That's unexpected. It sounded like it was okay for them to make use of what everyone else was doing with zero regard for if it would ruin the other person's plans. So if I see Max building a speed zone, I can steal it for myself as long as I'm doing it to help me kill the instructor and not just to be a dick to Max. Klein had also said they would be using the whole gym. And the whole gym was full of other students and faculty doing their own work. Is this something special he's doing for our group for some reason? Alden hadn't had much attention to spare for other groups this afternoon, but he would have noticed if they were chasing after Instructor Klein through the rescue section or hide-and-seek maze. Isn't it going to be extremely chaotic? 2 minutes later, he had the answer to his questions. It was chaotic. And Instructor Klein wasn't giving their group special treatment. He simply didn't need to utilize the whole gym to run circles around 10 brand new hero students. Running circles around people was his specialty as an agility brute. He was fast and strong, and he'd obviously played the class straight, choosing talents that made him a peak superhuman maneuverer. 1 second, he was running directly at Alden, but the moment Alden tried to throw up a length of frozen paracord to stop him, Klein slid sideways across the white floor at the same rate he'd been running. It defied human anatomy in his own momentum, and Alden's rope whipped harmlessly past him. Constantine tried a flying tackle that the instructor ducked under without even looking, and then almost too fast for Alden to make out, the teacher changed directions again and was running at completely different angle. It's the instant corner skill. A maestro yelled in an oddly panicked voice. We know it's the instant corner skill. Kahn yelled back. That was the last time anyone had enough air in their lungs to yell anything. Alden chased, he swung his rope. He threw his sandbag. He tried to trip Klein. He tried to hit him. From above, below, behind. Shit, where is he now? I can't keep up. Gasping, he whirled around in a circle twice before he finally caught up to the instructor visually. Never mind physically. It was insane. It got even more insane when he started to realize that Instructor Klein wasn't trying his best. His feet stayed on the ground. He hadn't cast a spell yet. Agility brutes were phenomenal gymnasts, so in addition to just running around them all like they were standing still, he could have been flying through the air over their heads or using any number of impressions. A blocked attack here, an invisible step there, he didn't bother with it. He seemed to have limited himself for their sakes and imposed additional personal rules on what he could do. They couldn't even threaten him enough to get him out of their corner of the gym. A couple of people were hunched over, trying to breathe. The Meister who'd shouted about the skill was moving so sluggishly that Alden was pretty sure he wasn't really trying. Max's spell impressions had run out a few minutes ago after he'd laid down a series of traps that had ended up catching classmates instead of the instructor, and he'd been running doggedly after Klein ever since, despite the fact that he was always miles from catching him. As for Kahn, he was fast. He wasn't as fit as his older brother, and it was only S-rank adjuster fast. But he was still quicker and more agile than Alden was without ground. He was trying like hell, too, but it wasn't enough. His face was tomato red, and sweat literally flew off him as he nearly sideswiped Alden during the course of his pursuit. Alden was trying to think, to come up with some rope shape or technique that would miraculously be enough to stop a middle-aged man who'd spent the past 30 or 40 years training his superpowers. There's nothing. There's literally nothing. He jogged past Everly Kim, who was squatting on the floor with her head down. She'd been that way for a while. Alden wouldn't be surprised if she had awful muscle cramps or something after her feat during the rescue session. Maybe if I swing the weight on the end of my rope around to build up momentum, freeze it, and then surprise him with. Shit. Klein suddenly pulled his direction-changing trick again, and now they were face to face too quickly. Alden brought the preserved paracord between them like a spear with a bulbous weighted nose instead of a point, and he crouched, trying to anticipate the instructor's next move. He wished he'd unfurled just 2 more feet. It was about 8 feet long at the moment, which made it more manageable. But 12 would have given him just a little more reach. That was always the thing. Klein was never the right distance away from him. No matter what length line he chose, no matter how sure he was that the teacher hadn't spotted him stealthily unfurling more or drawing it back, the man always seemed to know exactly what Alden's range was. Just like he always knew where Max had laid down a trap or where the Meister, wham! A body smashed into Alden's from the right, and both of them flew sideways. Fuck. He landed on his left shoulder. His head hit the floor hard and fast, or it felt like it did. In reality, the gym suit stiffened around him, cushioned him, and magically shielded him from what would definitely have been a concussion. A fraction of a second later, the bottom of a pair of sneakers landed on him. One on his chest, one on his face, and his assailant springboarded off of him. Toward nothing. Astrid soared through the air, roaring, then splatted onto the floor and rolled. Alden sat up and stared at her through the helpful scrolling list of damage he'd just taken from the surprise attack. Was she trying something? What in the world? The low pain setting meant he could focus more on his confusion than his injuries. Klein sprinted away with Max and Kahn hustling after him, both of them wearing startled expressions. So at least Alden wasn't the only one who didn't understand why he'd just been brutally tackled. Astrid was getting onto her hands and knees. She looked annoyed. So, belly flopping on the floor hadn't been her intention? Alden pushed himself up, too. His paracord and sandbag had come along for the ride with him since he had them tied to him, though he'd lost preservation when he'd fallen. He lifted and re-preserved in the same motion, but before he could attempt to catch and attack the instructor again, he lost his footing. A slick coat of ice was spreading across the gym floor from behind him. It lifted his shoes from the ground in an instant and toppled him again. He rolled over to see Everly, barefoot and running across the patch of ice she had made toward Instructor Klein. She had managed to catch their entire group and the spell. Max was down. Khan was windmilling comically like he was on skates for the first time in his life. Astrid was still on all fours. And the instructor had stopped. For the first time. He wasn't falling, but he was standing still. Get him, thought Alden, lifting his rope and preserving yet again as he tried to clamber to his feet. He wasn't sure if he was rooting for himself or Everly. Just before she reached him, Instructor Klein smiled and nodded once, and then he slipped around her like an ice dancer, his mouth reciting a spell. A second later he grabbed something unseen in the air and heaved against it, sending himself sliding hard and fast on his feet across the frozen floor away from Everly. Backwards. Toward me. Finally. Sliding, Klein had less control. He was in a crouch, knees bent and elbows in, flying across the ice, keeping his eyes on the threat running toward him. Alden was behind him on one knee, halfway toward standing, but Klein was about to slide past him, just a few feet away, and the line was long enough if he stretched to. He held it out. The slender orange cord with the sandbag on the end wasn't much, but it was what he had, and if all he could do was slow Klein down for a second so Everly could freeze his ass somehow, that would be great. Alden snapped his wrist up and down rapidly, trying to make it harder for Klein to dodge over or under, since Alden was convinced he definitely had eyes in the back of his head. The agility brute's back hit the cord. Alden felt the impact on his authority as Klein bounced off. He didn't look over at Alden or uncurl. His body stayed in its crouched position. He slid fast toward Everly again across the thin layer of water that coated the ice. It made him look like a pool ball ricocheting off the edge of the table. Everly's eyes widened. She pointed at him and shouted the name of a spell. Her fingers started to move. She hadn't done it fast enough. Klein slid right past her, cast his own invisible floating block spell again, and then he flung himself hard in a new direction. Everly's patch of super slick ice was a circle with a radius of 20 yards by Alden's estimate. Klein skidded to the edge of it, rolled and sprang to his feet. Then he stood there and watched all of his battered and exhausted students try to escape without falling on their asses. He looked like he was having a blast. Line of asterisks. They were so tired they didn't even speak when the session ended. They all just stumbled off to let Big Snake take his turn beating them up. Alden's skill was toast. He'd tried an extra long line again in an attempt to poke Klein just one more time, and in combo with the breath mint handicap, the effort had done the skill in. His officially usable magical powers were now a candle lighter and screaming invisible balls that would cost him $600 a pop. Everly's floor-freezing spell had required a reagent, too. She was eyeing a bottle half full of some dark blue powder with a depressed look on her face. Alden patted her on the shoulder. She nodded. This was how they were all communicating now. Words required lungs. Lungs required air. Too much trouble. He didn't even have the energy to say, "Why, Astrid? Why did you randomly attack me and then throw yourself at nothing?" But she had given him the shoulder pat of companionship when they finally escaped from the ice. So he figured it was all good. She'd only tackled him and then used his nose as a launch pad. Everyone had their idiosyncrasies. "You all look like you're raring to go," Big Snake said in a jovial voice when they appeared. He clapped his hands together hard enough that it would probably have hurt their ears if not for the suits. "We're gonna start with a few laps to get you warmed up." Soren whimpered. "Ha ha ha," said the instructor. "Just kidding. Just kidding. Looks like Torsten put you through the ringer. Wednesday, you'll all start with me, and then it's my turn to wear you out. So, the way this session works is the reverse of Instructor Klein's. You all run, and I attack. That should go well. Well, that's the gist of it. This is where you'll find out what your powers can do for self-defense. I'll be teaching you general principles of self-defense, but that's mostly in your homework. Today, since you look about dead, we have the magic management talk and you get a short breather before I start to attack you." He stepped over to Alden and grinned. In Big Snake mode, Instructor Waker was so tall and wide it made Alden feel like a child standing in front of an adult. And the superhero vibes were strong, even though the instructor was in the same gray unitard as everyone else. Alden felt a tiny thrill through his tiredness. Big Little Snake was about as famous as an avowed could be without being a hyperbole, and on top of that, he had been considered extremely kid-friendly prior to the tank-punching incident. An insanely strong morpher known for a larger-than-life personality, entertaining charity work, and non-lethal captures was hard not to like. Somewhere in the back of a cabinet in Connie's kitchen, there was a cup with pictures of Big Snake on it that would turn into Little Snake when you added cold drinks. "You've got a magic shield," the instructor said to Alden. "That's about as classic as a self-defense skill can be. But what do you have without the magic shield?" "Not much," Alden said. "That's right. You can use your wits and your muscle, but even then, you've got a lot more options for using those things when the magic shield is up and running. So what's the most important thing for you, as an avowed, in a fight or a disaster?" Alden didn't know why this felt like a trick question. "Not losing my shielding skill." "Right. Only it might be better to say the most important thing is getting the job done without dying. You've all got to know how to treat your power like a finite resource. You'll get stronger here at school, but you'll never get so strong you can win every fight by just flinging your power around however you like." He looked up at the ceiling. "Even if you get strong enough to beat every last problem we've got here on Earth, there's bigger problems." "Oh," thought Alden. Good. He was relieved a faculty member had finally addressed it. They were in superhero school, but it was starting to feel weird that the old avowed hardly ever referenced off-planet work. "I know I'm overly concerned with what's going on out there. And I'm in a different situation from most people because I'm probably going to be unusually useful in that capacity one day. But I was starting to feel like I was crazy. What if a criminal runs from you?" Instructor Klein had asked earlier. "What if a demon runs toward me?" Alden had thought. Smiling, Instructor Marion had said, "You need to learn maneuvering and positioning so you can escape from demons. In later courses, you'll have the opportunity to learn about structural integrity," Instructor Fragment had told them. Because chaos eats and mutates fucking everything. It was like everyone else was talking about the weather while Alden had a disturbed man wearing a sandwich board in his head that said, "Beware of moon-sized demons devouring Earth and the end of days." Like Hoyu's mom, Big Snake got summoned a lot. And considering his skill set, it probably wasn't for waiting tables at college parties. Maybe it made sense for him to be the one to bring it up. "You ought to be trying to exhaust your levelable talents often," Big Snake was saying. "And your spell impressions. Oh, the ones that won't bankrupt you." The last was said in response to Everly going white as a sheet and clutching her bottle of blue powder like the instructor might steal it from her. "Whether you have gym or not, find ways to burn them out. Learn them. Know how much you can do with them before you hit fatigue. This quarter we're still getting to know your talents and you're still getting to know them yourselves. In gym courses after this one, you'll be expected to manage your skill usage better so that you're finished about the same time the class is. Understanding how far you can push your magic before you lose it is a lifesaver." He looked around at them all. "Now let me show you why you don't want to come to my session without your powers." He bent down toward a large cardboard box at his feet and pulled out a tennis ball. It looked small in his hand. "I've been working on my pitching accuracy this month." He started stretching out his right shoulder. "We're going to die," Khan whispered. Nobody disagreed with him. Chapter 101 In F-City, there was a neighborhood where apartment blocks and towers gave way to rolling lawns, miniature patches of forest, and sporting fields. The mansions, decadent odes to magical architecture, nestled around the curves of artificial hills or in groves of trees, strategically planned to give the owners the illusion of space and nature in a city-state where those two things were precious commodities. The boy found the address he'd been looking for in a thatch of bottlebrush-shaped trees that backed up to the largest racetrack on the island. He walked along the edge of a paved driveway that was crammed with parked luxury cars and motorcycles. One of his hands clenched the handle of a heavy metal cooler. The other worked nervously on the edge of his jacket. He flinched as a drone sailed over his head. And again as one of the rocks lining the drive, apparently an artificial one, suddenly played birdsong through a hidden speaker as he passed. Private property warnings flashed on his interface, and he checked the address in his messages again. This was it. This was the spot. He drew in a breath and knocked on a tall, smooth bronze door with no apparent handle. It opened, and a woman with cat-eye contact lenses blinked at him. She was wearing a leopard print bra and jeans. He didn't know where to put his eyes. "I'm here to see Orpheus," he said. She leaned forward and looked at his cooler. "Hey. That's great." Greater than she almost stumbled over her own high-heeled boots as she stepped aside to let him in. "Orpheus. There's a guy here for you." Greater than there were people moving through the house behind her. Walking up a floating staircase, pressing each other against a railing, laughing at nothing and the floor beside a 4-foot-tall antique vase. "He's not coming. Go to him. Go. He is on the veranda. Take your shirt off. Get comfy with us." Greater than she hugged him as he passed, and he blushed. He didn't take his shirt off. It took the boy a long while to find who he'd come to see. The man wasn't on the veranda but outside floating on an inflatable chair in a pool that had been heated hot enough to steam. He was completely naked, which was less of a shock after the amount of nudity the boy had encountered on his search through the house. The drone he had seen earlier hovered over the man, drizzling his forehead with something that looked like honey. "Orpheus," said one of the women in the pool. "Orpheus, I think the presents you promised are here." She took a swig from a bottle that didn't look like it had originated on Earth. The float Orpheus was on rotated slowly. He drifted over to the side. He blinked up with blown pupils at the boy with the cooler. The pool lights in the water below him suddenly cut on and glowed an eerie green. The sun hadn't set yet. It was probably on a timer. Just a coincidence. "You bring the drugs?" Orpheus asked. Were they just going to talk about it casually like this? Out in the open. "I brought you some snacks." "Ha ha. All right. Jacob, wasn't it? How did someone your age get your hands on the good stuff? Hand them over. Your half of the deal is in the cabana over there. Good luck hauling it out of here. It's heavy." Jacob leaned over and held out the cooler. Orpheus took it in both hands. A brown-haired girl, remarkable mostly for the fact that she was fully clothed in slacks and a polka-dotted blouse, was sitting on the edge of a teak lounge chair. She glanced over at Orpheus and raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you even going to check to make sure your snacks are there so you can destroy your organs properly this time? For all you know, he brought you takeout." Orpheus ignored her. He set the cooler in the water. "Hey, it floats." Eager to take his earnings and leave, Jacob hurried over to the cabana. There was a padded duffel bag on the pavement beside some kind of alien hookah. He squatted and unzipped it. The thing inside looked like an aquarium full of yellow oil and clear water. A small silver ball floated in the precise center, in the place where the two substances met and refused to mix. There were less parts than he was expecting. No mechanicalness to it. Jacob preferred the open complexity of wires, pipes, and circuits to something so obviously not of this world. Because the complexity was still there. It had to be, for this thing to do what it was supposed to do. But it was all hidden. All magic. It made it feel not quite real. He pointed at the object to target it, and then said the name of one of his talents, device identification. His interface responded. Device, submerger device status, complete. That was less information than he was hoping for. But it was enough. The submerger would help him, and then it would help the people who were helping him, and then, "You have to shout the name of your talents to use them?" asked a voice from behind him. Jacob looked over his shoulder to see the girl standing in the entrance of the cabana. One of the canvas curtains was almost brushing her hair. "You might want to work on actually learning how to use your powers without the contract holding your hand. Instead of doing whatever it is you plan to do with that." "I don't see how my life is any of your business," said Jacob. She shrugged. A mini-drone appeared behind her head and made a cute, cartoonish snapping sound. He stood up. "Did you just take my picture?" "Yes." "Why?" Because my brother was giving you extremely rare magical equipment in exchange for a few illegal potions and snorts he could have gotten in other ways. Stolen equipment. It's not his, you know. He is a brat in his 30s, so you're getting something extraordinary practically for free. I dislike that. Who are you two? I'll keep this. She shooed the drone away. Maybe one day you'll be something other than a drug dealer. And I'll ask you to pay off your debt. I don't owe you anything. I made a deal with Orpheus Vora, not whoever you are. And I'm not a drug dealer. She arched a perfectly plucked brow. Did you not just deal drugs? He stared at her. She smiled, waved, and left. In F-City, there was a neighborhood where the skyscrapers seemed to grow taller by the year. Nautilus Needle crowned the district. Its silver spire glimmered like a Christmas tree topper, and the protective helix shields wrapping it were visible from every exterior angle. If you could afford right-made shielding devices for an entire skyscraper, you wanted people to know it. At 7:15, the carriage restaurant at the base of the Needle was in the middle of its dinner rush. The doors barely had time to close before they opened once more to let customers in and out. A woman in a caramel-colored pantsuit stepped inside, and an employee hurried over at her wave. The girl smiled. Hello. Do you need help with your order, Toda? Greater than. Someone took the calligraphy menu out of the window, said the woman. Why? Ma'am. The girl asked in an uncertain voice. The woman tucked a strand of graying brown hair behind her ear and sighed. It goes there. It's the perfect piece for that spot. Put it back. I think a customer complained about it blocking the view. Greater than. Don't cater to outliers. This is a business. I don't under. Greater than. Ah. Ms. Barr. Ms. Manon Barr. You've come back after only a week this time. I'm flattered. The owner of the restaurant trotted over and took her hand in both of his. Shaking it, he said, the usual. Yes. And have someone find the big menu. Your exterior is out of balance without it. Mo, go find the menu. He said to the girl. Make sure you put it back exactly where it was. All right? Greater than. She's new, he explained to Manon. She doesn't know what your advice does for us. As the girl headed toward the back of the restaurant, he called, and keep venting the scent onto the sidewalk. That's what I hired a sky shaper for. A few minutes later, the menu was back in place, and Manon was crossing the street, one hand gripping a paper bag already flecked with grease and the other wrapped around a cherry lemonade. She sipped it, her eyes fixed on the words floating in front of her eyes instead of the people, shops, and cars around her. Of course there's nothing to worry about, dear. It's only a hiccup. I always pay my debts. That. And only that. To make matters worse, Manon couldn't risk bothering the sender more than she already had. Even after all this time, she had so little power in this relationship. So little ability to make sure she wasn't cheated out of what she'd been promised all those years ago. Some people were just too high above her for her to even bother trying. Fucking S-ranks, she whispered. It had been months since she'd sworn. That bitch of a university student. T-Qual. She had interfered in a system of carefully orchestrated relationships that had been running smoothly for years, just because she was eager to impress her instructors. Wizards grew more tedious the older Manon got. Everything grew more tedious the older Manon got. Like the personal rule about swearing. She had decided 30 years ago that it didn't fit her image. Image mattered. Everything mattered for a C. They were the most common rank. Most people were comforted by it. A C rank was never alone. Never the weakest. Never the strongest. And Zidora's everyman. She couldn't understand how everyone around her could be so content with their own mediocrity. But they were. Most humans didn't really want glory, despite what they said. They wanted comfort, and they wanted to fit in. Not that she would complain about that. Fitting people into places that made them feel so comfortable they never wanted to leave was her specialty. On the way up to her apartment, she scanned her contact list. It was different than most. She used it for brainstorming. Hundreds of groups were listed, each of them combinations of personalities she thought could be managed in specific ways. These were her pride and joy. They were what made Manon Bar more than a C-rank interior decorator. They were the proof that she was not content with mediocrity. Every personality group was a custom, moldable piece that would make it easier to complete large puzzles. The boater alone was divided into dozens of possible arrangements. Naya and Chris, the youngest, most attractive member of the boater and the sweet, awkward man who couldn't help but notice those things. If she invited just the two of them over, said the right things, served the right amount of wine, reprioritized their thoughts just a little, they would almost definitely go to Chris's apartment after they left and have sex. Naya would be embarrassed and confide in Manon. Chris would be smitten and confide in Manon. Afterward, they would both become even more subject to influence. She wasn't a sway. She couldn't create ideas for people. She could only arrange what already existed in their minds, a little clumsily, a little blindly, using a skill that was best at making sure people positioned their sofas correctly. In-group passions were powerful and easy to understand, but Chris would be hard to patch up afterward. It was the only reason she hadn't molded that piece yet. Her thoughts hovered over the Carl-Chris-Laura group. She could always put them together and take them somewhere that would allow Carl to play at his version of manly posturing. Maybe the golf course next time. He liked the game. Laura's knee was fully healed, and her spirits were finally up again. She had a damsel fantasy that got worse when Chris was around. Careful placement and suggestions would have her pretending to be hopeless, in an effort to make Chris notice her. Manon would prevent Chris from doing that. Instead, Carl would get to be an expert on the use of a putter or a driver or... were there more types? Some kind of ball hitter anyway. Manon didn't actually play golf, she played people. Carl probably does require the boost. If Laura had damsel fantasies, then he had dominance fantasies. It was a painful character trait for a low-rank living on Anzidora, but it made him useful. He could easily be persuaded to take risks the others would have to be ever so gently steered toward. He could also become easily enraged about things that less chronically frustrated people would ignore, which was more troublesome. The memory of the last time she'd almost lost control of him made her glance at another trio. Naya Alden Carl. A piece she'd imagined at Leaf Song. It was more of a half-baked, last-ditch emergency scheme than a real plan. The boy was a terrible target for her powers. He'd been doing private work for an unusually invested professor, and apart from that, teenagers changed all the time. Their bodies flooded them with hormones. Their immature brains gave them unpredictable notions. Every day they encountered ideas and experiences that were completely novel to them simply because they hadn't lived long enough to notice them before. She could shove them in one direction, but they might turn around and run in the opposite 10 minutes later because they'd suddenly discovered butterflies, French kissing, or communism. Most adults were more finished. But the piece hadn't relied on Alden anyway. Naya would have spent time with him with little prompting. She wouldn't have been interested in a 15-year-old, but she would have jokingly flirted if given enough of a push. It could all be tailored so that, at a particularly bad moment, Carl would see a woman who never gave him the time of day batting her eyes at a higher-ranking boy who was making more than twice his salary. It would be a knife plunged into his insecurities about himself. Manon couldn't really plan it out beyond that. But if the pieces around that moment were all correctly placed, she thought it would have ended with Carl starting the fight away from the rest of the boater. He would be fired. The boy wouldn't be invited back to Leaf Song either. The Artonans wouldn't have been perfectly sure who was at fault for the quarrel, and in the absence of perfect surety they'd simply blacklist both of them from working there again. Peanut's job for next year would likely be re-secured. But much more importantly, Teakwal would have been blamed for mismanaging the Avowed on campus. Manon couldn't afford for her to have the position again. And she won't be there now. I'm glad it worked out without me having to create such a sloppy three-person puzzle piece on the fly, she thought as she stepped out of the elevator into her apartment. And cutting Carl loose would have been a shame. She kicked off her high heels and walked across the cold marble in her hose. The apartment had been Hollywood glam for a couple of years now. Manon, who could find styles to suit anyone, could never seem to find one that suited herself for longer than that. Most adults were finished. Most C-ranks were content. She was different. Even the part of her that chose textiles for her own enjoyment refused to be satisfied. She stepped over to the window to look down on the people below her. It was lonely, at times. But it was better to be lonely than to be average, wasn't it? She shoved a nugget of the fried chicken into her mouth and looked around. She had a team of rabbit maids clean the place twice a week. It was so flawless she'd probably need to scuff it up a little if she ever tried to sell it. People thought they wanted perfection, but true perfection made them feel their own flaws more. But Manon liked true perfection. The one object that didn't fit in with the rest of the place stood out like a sore thumb to her eyes. It always stood out, no matter how she changed the style of her home. That was the way it should be. An eyesore? A thorn she refused to stop pressing her thumb against, for fear she'd forget it and enjoy the rose. She stepped over to the bookcase. The device was on the second shelf. She'd found it in a shop long ago. It had been ugly then and it was now, too. Some rights project, no doubt. It was a 15-year timer. The sand in the left side of the horizontal hourglass shape slid over to the right, 1 grain per minute. More than 500,000 grains per year. So many individual moments that added up to a pathetic handful of dirt. The left side of the glass was nearly empty. Manon stared at it. She ate the chicken. She shoved the pieces into her mouth faster as she watched another grain of sand disappear. She thought of Leaf Song. She wished, pointlessly, that the Artonand year could be shorter. It was close to 15 Earth months. Of course there's nothing to worry about, dear. It's only a hiccup. I always pay my debts. She thrust 2 pieces into her mouth at once, barely chewing the meat before she swallowed. Her oily fingers dove into the bag again and scrabbled against the crumbs at the bottom. Blinking, she looked down into it. It was empty. 20 pieces gone just like that. She told herself she'd been planning to save some for later. But she wondered if that was true. She'd eaten all 20 last time, too. She felt stuffed. The heartburn would hit soon. Manon had never had heartburn until she hit 50. She had never had a gray hair. She refused to fix either problem. More thorns to remind herself of what really mattered. Every few days one of Kivby's new instructors took her by ship to the other side of Munthegund, to Chaklo, the only populated city of significant size. There, they forced her to interact with other children for her well-being. Officially, the trips were for her to have fun. But she had much more fun in the travel dome, examining Roro's feather structures and sticking her head into the back of Kraw's mouth to see where the amazing serrated lash of his tongue was stored when it was not fully extended. These were, her honored instructors in Night Alice Arts agreed, educational pursuits. However, for some reason, they did not consider them to be sufficient to her socialization. The quaternary said that her intellectual abilities and her background meant she needed to spend more time with other young Artonans rather than less. Playdates were arranged with local families and schools. The events weren't terrible, but the first couple had gone strangely. Hopcatch had always been a good game when she played it with her sister. It had been a good game when she played it with Alden, too. Though of course his size meant he'd had to bounce with just 1 foot and catch with just 1 hand to make it fun and fair for both of them. When she played it with the children in Chaklo, she always won. After she realized that they were letting her win at a game she wasn't particularly good at, she couldn't even trust her victories in the games where she probably was superior. Of course she could answer trivia questions faster than a class full of her peers, but what if there was someone who could compete with her and they were staying silent because it was now clear that she would one day bear the responsibilities and receive the dignities of the wizard class? Before, there had been doubt. Distinguished Master Rodin, who would remain distinguished in her mind no matter what terrible misunderstanding had led to the removal of his higher title, had not truly yielded to her ambitions yet. He'd been warming up to the idea. She would have convinced him and earned real approval soon. But then he'd been sent away. Now Alden, a brave and honorable avowed, had told Knight Alisart single quote H that he believed Kivby had the makings of a true wizard. Even if Knight Alisart single quote H didn't know that Alden himself had embarked on the path of hieroness, she respected his opinion. As was natural. Kivby was still somewhat perplexed about the fact that the Avowed couldn't sense their authority. Avowed were important people. They performed magic. Distinguished Master Roden had always treated them like friends on the occasions when he summoned one to the lab she had been confident she understood, so she had never checked her assumptions. How embarrassing. Almost as embarrassing as her excitement at winning that first game of hopscotch, before she realized the others were yielding to her. "I don't think they enjoy playing with me," she had informed Instructor de la Tourney after they walked away from the school that had been the location for their second social adventure. "I think they are nervous around me." The instructor had looked down at her and smiled. "It does seem so, doesn't it? Don't give it both halves of your attention. They are only afraid because they rarely deal with wizards who are even deserving of the name here. Thegund has been a small place for quite some time. And the mother, the children of your birth class will not be nervous in your presence. They will often expect more of you, and because of that, it will not occur to most of them that letting you win a game would be anything but an insult. In fact, many of them will be deeply disappointed in you whenever you lose. That sounds bad, too. It's the way of things. Through our efforts may the way grow closer to perfection." "Through our efforts," Kivby repeated. "Perhaps you wish to suggest an effort that would make your social hours more enjoyable for everyone," the instructor prompted gently. Oh. Was this a lesson? The right answer was probably not that social hours would be better spent testing crossbite strength against various materials. "I think we should plan on competitive activities," she decided. "A wise choice. Plan some and show them to me," Instructor de la Tourney said. "Consider the comfort of your age mates and yourself." Her next playdates had involved practicing formal table manners at a restaurant with the owner's children and participating in an art garden program. Those worked out much better. Magic lessons were also going well. Kivby hoped they were anyway. She was improving faster with teachers available to help and personal advice from Instructor Gwenlore in every new video. But it wasn't proper for instructors to tell a student of her level how she compared to others. It was their job to worry over such matters in their own minds, and it was hers to devote herself fully. If she was in a proper class with a proper partner on the learning cushion beside her, or even better, with Alden, she would have had some sense of relative progress. Comparing herself to the adult wizards who traveled with the quaternary didn't offer the same opportunity for understanding her abilities. She assumed her control and sensitivity remained well below normal. However, Instructor de la Tourney had begun to imply that they should work with her out soon. He had almost finished correcting the flaws in her beginner's plain hand casting. Kivby hadn't been looking forward to this. She would have to reveal that she didn't have an Oriat, and they would all be confused, since she had claimed to previously and they'd seen it. Or they thought they had. Alden wished for his bond with an Oriat to remain private. He had told her she could tell whoever she wanted whenever she wanted, but that was only because he was trying not to create difficulties for her. Kivby refused to make difficulties for him. She could lie and say she'd given hers to him, but that would be regarded very oddly. She had more lessons available to her now and understood that if she'd given him her Oriat and he'd traveled so far away, the distance would have severed it from her violently. It would have destroyed the Oriat and wounded her. Kivby was not obviously wounded. How would she make that story seem reasonable? Another solution had to be found quickly. And Oriats didn't sprout up from the ground like fungus. In fact, Kivby had determined after some consideration and study that there were only 2 unbonded Oriats on all of Munthegund, and 5 more in orbit. There was one here in the travel dome in a spell-locked case. It, like the 5 on the large ship, was for Alisart single quote H or the wizards traveling with her to use if their own Oriats were severed. Or if, during the course of the long voyage, they progressed with their casting to such an extent that they wished to bond a second one. Kivby couldn't take any of those. She would have, since 6 pairs was an excessive number of Oriats for the Quaternaries group to possess. It was a quantity they would only need if they encountered truly awful problems during their travels. But she couldn't open the boxes. And even if she could, she suspected the Oreads would be inventoried at the end of the journey. Adults loved to inventory things. At the lab, entire days had been devoted to making sure everything was where it was supposed to be and what it was supposed to be. That left just one option. Only one on this entire side of the solar system. Her plan to obtain it had already been in motion for 3 Earth weeks. Kivby liked to think in Earth weeks with one half of her consciousness so that she always knew what Alden was probably doing. Right now it was Monday on Anzidora. Since his last set of videos, he would have achieved his goal of entering an educational program that would help him on his journey to becoming the best avowed. He and beautiful, fat Victor the cat would be living in a school. And they would have access to instructors all the time. By the time she received his next video, she would be a robber in addition to being a laboratory bomber. She was sure he would not mind. While Alden and Victor were learning from the human instructors, Kivby was at the local museum of the Empire with hers. She was accompanied by a group of other children who had been invited along for her socialization. And by Kra, who had forced his way into the experience after she had maybe exaggerated the amazing terribleness of the antique weapons on display in the museum. Kra was an important part of the plan. People looked at him a lot whenever he was around, which meant that they looked at everything else less. 2 eyes on the Greivik out at all times. Very silly. Kivby clenched her fingers as they approached the room where the unbonded Oread was stored. It was part of a collection of magical tools. She had seen it once before when her father had brought her and her sister here. It's still there, she thought as they entered the room. It's still out on the table like I remember. None of the wizarding supplies in this room were dangerous or fragile, so of course none of them were displayed with barriers between them and the public. To separate objects of learning from the very people who had come to learn about them would imply all kinds of terrible things about the museum and how it viewed its visitors. Kivby felt guilty. She felt awfully guilty as her bare feet carried her closer and closer to the polished table with the white Oread on it. But after careful consideration, this was the only course of action that she thought wouldn't hurt anyone. The museum's collection would be less accurate, but that was not as serious as the worst possible outcome she could imagine. What if someone took Alden's Oread from him? Kivby had now realized her own understanding of avowed wasn't perfect. Alden seemed to sense some risk to himself. She would trust his judgment. He was supposed to have an Oread. He did have one. And it was a lovely shade of purple blue that was also now her favorite color. It absolutely was forevermore. It was his. He had bled for her. She had smelled it. She had seen it when they cut off his clothes. What if Roro hadn't been there? Alden was going to be the best avowed. And they would both be wizards. Through our efforts may the way of things grow closer to perfection. Okra? She called when she was only an arm's length away from the loop of soft white string on the table. You should show everyone the trick you can do with your tongue. Heads and eyes turned. She took it on faith that all of the heads and eyes turned. She acted. Once, she had failed to take a small risk out of fear. Once, she had hesitated to act. It had cost her almost everything. And it had almost cost Alden everything, too, though he would never admit that it was true. Kivb, her father had said on that last, most awful day. This human is an avowed. Distinguished Master Roden has sent him to help us. Be brave for your sister. Kivby wouldn't be someone who hesitated anymore. A couple of hours later, when they left the Museum of the Empire, she had an Oread in her pocket. It was real. She'd been a little afraid that it wouldn't be. What if she'd been wrong, and they were much too valuable to be left out on tables even in an important educational location? What if instead of a real Oread, it had been a fake, like the one she'd left in its place? It was a perfect-looking fake. She had tried to make it herself, but she had quickly realized she wasn't talented enough to get the sheen right. She had asked instructor Delatorni to make it for her, claiming she wanted to give it to one of her dolls. Fortunately, the instructor didn't keep track of her dolls, so he didn't realize that she didn't have an Ertonen one. They took the personal transport ship back to the travel dome. It was a long trip to the other side of the planet, but they would arrive in time for third meal, a quirk that the quaternary enjoyed every night. "Instructor," said Kiv B, her fingers still stroking the string in her pocket the way she had seen Alden do so many times after he'd bonded with his own. Perhaps the more she mimicked him, the braver she would be. "I would like to take a morning name." There was a pause. "I see," Delatorny said. "That is a very serious decision. Have you thought it through as carefully as you can?" "I will not live a life that would bring shame to it," she said. "I wasn't sure before, but I am now." Chapter 102 Were you expecting the competition for the showers to be the highest drama part of gym class? Alden asked Hoyu as the two of them headed down a broad avenue toward north of North Gym. It was a 10-minute walk from the MPE building, right on the edge of campus, and apparently, they had both had the same idea when they discovered they were going to have to wait for their turns anyway. Hoyu was gulping from a water bottle. "I'm glad my group was getting along well. I think the one with the speedsters in it had some kind of issue. They seemed tense. Finley had looked pretty mad. It was the first time Alden had seen the Scottish boy in anything but a cheerful mood. I didn't have the attention span to watch them run from Snake's tennis ball pitches. It somehow adds insult to injury that he makes you chase the balls down after they hit you." When they reached the airy glass building that Alden thought was the main gym, the same girl in lime green yoga pants who'd been protecting the entrance from riffraff and gawkers on his first visit greeted them both warmly. She was giving out cups of some of the liquefied salads that the spa upstairs bottled and sold as drinks. They both took one. As they headed toward the showers, Hoyu sipped the black pepper beet juice he'd chosen and wrinkled his nose. "I don't think I'm old enough to drink this." Alden raised an eyebrow at him. "I'm trying," Hoyu said. Being friends with Lexi's heart. He got really serious about nutrition in the past year or two. I saw him cut a single piece of chocolate in half once. And there I was stuffing 6 in my mouth at a time. I want to eat healthy, but I like candy so much. And anything fried. Is that why you bought the slow cooker? Hoyu nodded. That, and because my mom kept telling me I shouldn't buy it because I wouldn't ever use it. I'm going to use it every day. And send her pictures. Starting tonight. The bouncing oatmeal was just a temporary setback. It didn't even taste that bad. He looked curiously at a man casting spells on a section of the climbing wall as they passed it. I'm so glad you've got a membership here, too. I really wanted one, and my parents wanted me to have it. But I almost told them not to buy it for me because it's so, Richie. Yes. Mom and Dad both come here, but they have to. They need the facilities and a heavy gym. I could probably have used the school equipment until I was halfway through uni. But everything here is so much nicer, and I used to play on the rock wall in the on-site daycare and just imagine how great it was going to be when I was finally 15 and I could use the real one. They consented to have high winds, floods, and earthquakes. I went for it. And you're here, too. We'll both look Richie together, and it won't be as awkward when we leave school to use the better stuff. Happy to spoil myself with you. They walked past an attendant into the room with the big rainfall showers and the ridiculously fluffy scented towels. Hoyu beamed at him. Sue, since you're here with me, and you're not going to freak out about it, I'll confess that I actually already have potion therapy sauna slots booked for a few days a week until the end of term. I was always planning to come here instead of using the student showers. Alden blinked at him. The potion saunas had been a part of his facilities tour. For 100 gold, or more depending on which sauna you chose, you could sweat and inhale magical substances that did rather out there sounding things. Are you having your spirit waxed or? No. Hoyu laughed. Is that even real? I'm using the recovery sauna. Potions aren't as good as healers, obviously, but if I sit in there for 90 minutes or so, I don't really need to rest on my rest days, and I don't get too sore. I'm just going to do my homework in there instead of sitting through study halls. My mom did sauna homework her whole last year of uni. It was her idea, and since I wasn't saying no to the gym membership, I wasn't going to say no to something like this. He's basically turning the 2-hour study hall into recovery time. Alden wondered if Mrs. Zhangdemir had been attempting to balance out Hoyu's lifestyle when she tried to set a dorm decorating budget. "That's very efficient," said Alden. "I'm telling you so you can book a slot tonight, if you want to do homework together. And so you're not like, 'Where did Hoyu go? Is he trying to get away from me?' when I jumped straight out of the shower and run off to the sauna instead of heading back to the dorms with you. Gotcha. Do you want to come?" Isn't it a lot of famous people sitting around in towels together, talking about superhero stuff? That sounded like a high-pressure environment to do homework, and unless your parents were famous superheroes and you were used to them. I've only used it a few times so far. It's not that many people, and they're all zoned out watching videos or working on their interfaces. They don't talk and interrupt my studying, so it's good. Let me think about it. Line of asterisks. Alden had a couple of minutes to debate it while they both rinsed off. Pro: doing homework with Hoyu was in line with his mission to be a great roommate. Con: shirtlessness. Pro: trying the new magic thing with someone his own age for backup instead of facing down a bunch of 40-year-olds who could create waterspouts and pitch rail cars by himself. Con: money. Pro: feeling good tomorrow instead of feeling ouch tomorrow. The cons aren't really cons. He didn't want to be shy about the tattoo forever with the people he actually lived with. And as for the money, Alden had given half of it to Bo so that his family and friends would be taken care of no matter where he was. He'd be spending half of what he had left on supplies, gear, and calling fees to make himself the most absurdly well-equipped and well-connected rabbit on the true planets the next time he was summoned. A little would be set aside in his backup emergency fund. But all the rest of it, he'd just about talked himself into spending $1 million however he wanted. As fast as he felt like. When the mood struck him, Nia had told him to save it for down payment on his future immortality, and everything on the internet was about preparing for retirement. Meanwhile, the tiny remnants of the person he'd been in January kept shouting that this much money should last him until he was a wrinkly old man. He thought all of them were overconfident in his ability to make it to the wrinkly stage of life. Besides, even if he did live to a ripe old age, 2 or 3 short summonings a year would make for a decent salary by his standards. He'd be absolutely floored if he only got summoned twice a year. Mind made up, he flicked through his interface and booked a recovery sauna slot. Then he quickly checked the North of North website to make sure he actually understood what you were supposed to do in potion saunas. Just sit there. No clothes or shoes. Towels. Shower first. No noisy, bright, or smelly spells. No food. Respect the tranquility of the environment. Gee, they don't tell her to hide your Oriat. That's an oversight. He could go with under the wrist cuff or on a thigh. The Oriat was getting more and more helpful every day about staying put comfortably wherever he wanted it to. A couple of minutes later, towel around his waist, he was stepping into the sauna. It was hot and spacious with soft lighting and steam. 5 women, 3 men, and Hoyu each had plenty of room to themselves on the 2 tiers of pale wood benches. Alden assumed it was all normal enough. For Apex anyway. The adults mostly had that fit and flawless look about them that was so common in this gym he hardly ever noticed it anymore. And there was a little bitty cauldron on a pedestal in the middle of the floor. The clear substance inside was blood bloobing, and he thought it was the source of the watermelonish scent. Hoyu smiled brightly and waved him over. "I'm going to watch all the drone footage of my rescues first," he said quietly. "And then we have that reading assignment on outsmarting enemies for offense." Alden sat down beside him. By the time he'd started to sweat, he'd gotten over the inherent oddness of doing homework in such an uncommon environment, mostly because Hoyu was a dedicated student. Alden couldn't stay hung up on towel etiquette while they were having a serious texting conversation about whether saving 2 of the sandbags at once would increase rescue speed enough to justify the difficulty, risk, and/or talent strain. The time went by quickly. A gym employee brought water for them and a refill potion for the tiny cauldron just as he finished up the reading for Instructor Klein. It had already been an hour. His homework was half done. He felt tired, but a little less so than when he'd sat down. Either his body liked saunas or it liked inhaling magic steam. Most of the people who'd been here to start with were gone. There was just one woman wearing cucumbers over her eyes while she lounged on the top bench. Which was technically having food in the sauna, wasn't it? He glanced over at Hoyu. His dark hair was stuck to his forehead, and his mouth was moving slightly. He was one of those people who did that even when they were reading silently. Alden kept at his own homework. Cucumber Lady left about 15 minutes later. Alden was busy watching a video, so he wouldn't have noticed. But as soon as she closed the door behind her, Hoyu said, "Why can she wear food, but we can't eat food?" I was thinking the same thing. Hoyu looked over at him. "Thanks for studying with me. I didn't beg too much, did I? I know it's expensive. I just got excited to have a gym buddy. The only other people I know of who are even close to our age here are a couple of uni first years. This is fun. I probably wouldn't ever have tried it if you hadn't asked, so I'm glad you did," Alden said. "I was more worried about wearing my towel backwards than the money." Hoyu looked thoughtful. "I don't think you could wear a towel backward. What if I got here and everyone else had turned theirs into a toga? Or they were supposed to be for our heads instead of our waists?" Hoyu snorted. "It could happen. You Anisidorans have weird customs. Spas have weird customs. Magic has weird customs. All three combined in one location? If I'd walked in and found out we all had to remove our towels and bow to the cauldron, I wouldn't have been very surprised." "You were supposed to do that." Alden stared at him. The other boy's expression was sincere. "It's all right that you didn't do it. Since it was your first time, nobody expected you to know. Lexi's right about you. You do deliver jokes in the exact same tone as serious material." Hoyu grinned. "What if you do that to someone? You can't do that. Someone like Jeffy will totally get naked and worship a wizard soup pot. Jokes are funnier when they're subtle." He lifted an arm up and over his head to start a shoulder stretch. "I'm glad you wanted to try it. I was a lot more focused knowing someone else was doing the same assignments." Hoyu was not going to mention it. Alden was gratified but not really surprised. He's so good-natured. And his mom. Alden decided he wasn't going to get a better chance to bring it up himself. "Do you think our classmates will make a big deal about the tattoo when they see it?" Arm still bent behind his head, Hoyu cut his eyes toward him. "It's real, right?" "Yes. You just have to ignore them," Hoyu said. "You're rooming with me and Lexi and Lude. Plus everyone's already talking about how something crazy happened to you. And you're a rabbit. The purity people have already slotted you in with the rest of us. They are stupid and they just repeat whatever their parents say, so who cares?" Alden felt like he was missing at least a couple of social factors that Hoyu was treating as obvious. "The purity people? You know, the ones who are like, anyone who wants to work for the Artonans is an alien bumkisser. Anyone who gets summoned all the time cares more about money than human pride. Those people. I think there are only one or two in our whole class who are seriously that way." He dropped his arm and shrugged. "I haven't noticed," said Alden. "Sometimes it's someone who's lost a family member to an emergency summons, and then, I understand. They are grieving and angry. But usually it's just the kids of contract refusers, or people who've never been called at all for some reason, and they want to act like not being a part of that aspect of avowed life somehow makes them better than everyone else. So they're assholes. Mostly. Those people are going to be terrible no matter what, so I say don't worry about them. Everyone else." Hoyu's brows suddenly lowered. "Maybe I wouldn't flash it around the locker room, after all. Even if most of them don't really have a problem with private contracts, they are still going to say stupid things and gossip about it. It's the same reason I don't tell most people when my parents are doing something dangerous." He nodded once, as if to settle the matter, then added, "And obviously don't worry about me. Or any mature people. Mom and Dad both have tattoos. From Triplanet's work and from the demon suppression. Everyone who helps with that gets a secrecy one. And Lexi's little sister has 8 now. Half of them are turtles," said Alden. Hoyu laughed. Lexi won't admit it, but he's super worried that his parents are wrong and they won't actually wash off. I think he's already planning to murder anyone who says anything about the fact that Irina is blue. Line of asterisks. They headed back to the dorm in the dark, and they met a rolling cafeteria delivery drone on the way that had half of Hoyu's supper in it. "Listen," Hoyu said, walking backward while he pleaded with a slowly trundling box, "that's my vegetable rice. I'm Hoyu Zhangdamir, Garden Hall, Suite 208. That's me. My name's on your lid display. Give it to me, and I'll get to eat it sooner and you'll get to go back to the cafeteria sooner." "It makes sense." "Beep," the drone said angrily when Hoyu moved to block its way again. "Not beep. Rice. My rice. I want it." Alden was trying not to lose it. "I don't think it understands you. It probably can't give it to you until it reaches the room. It's such a slow, dumb one." "Why does CNH have slow, dumb drones?" Alden coughed. "You want me to pick it up? They make a huge racket and report you to drone operations if you interfere with their delivery for more than a second or two, and then an operator scolds you," said Hoyu, stepping out of the drone's path and rolling his eyes. "No, I mean, tell me to pick it up." Hoyu blinked. "You mean with your skill? I recover from fatigue quickly, so it will work for this. And the drone can't beep or report if it's preserved, right? We're just going to help it get to our room faster." "That's crazy. Drone operations is going to think it learned to teleport. Let's do it. Pick it up." Alden swooped down on the drone. A few minutes later, laughing like dumbasses, they set the rolling box down in front of the doors to Garden Hall, then hid behind a planter watching it. "It's so freaked out," Hoyu whispered, watching the box sit there silently. "How did I get here?" Alden whispered back. "Where am I? I am full of rice and confusion." "You're so weird." "Shut up. You're hiding behind a pepper plant with me." "Peppers? Are these ones we can take?" "Oh, it's figured it out. I'm getting a delivery notice." He bounced over to the drone, and its lid popped open. "You two look happy," Lute said when they stepped into the room shortly after that. He was lying on the Chesterfield, reading one of Hoyu's Chinese comic books. Downright vibrant compared to Lexi. He staggered in, ate some of the food in the cooker, and he's been in the tub ever since. "Does he bathe with his whip?" "Maybe. He is a meister. They do things like that," said Hoyu, setting his container of rice on the counter and lifting the lid on the chicken onion dish he'd concocted. "This doesn't look bad." "It's really good with ramen," said Lute. "It is? I have to call my mom." Alden told himself he was content with the liquid salad he'd bought on the way out of the gym and the bean burgers he was microwaving. He carried his plate into the living room and took Lexi's favorite armchair. "The self-mastery word chain was fantastic," he told Lute between bites of burger. Lute dropped the comic book on the ottoman and rolled over to look at him. "It's cool, right? I don't think I'd want to use it every day, since this shirt now has a hole burned into the back of it that seemed like a completely reasonable thing to do at the time. But it was so good in the gym. It ran out about the time Big Snake started pelting me with death balls." "Death balls? Tennis balls at deadly speeds," Hoyu called. "I know I was only my normal self again, and my normal self is pretty good at running around and duking. But I felt so awkward all of the sudden. Like my limbs got stupider. Yeah, I'm always disappointed in my natural state of being when it fizzles out, too. Do you still want to learn it? I need to pay the debt. Can't we do that tonight?" Luke looked at the plate on Alden's lap. "Sure. But not while you're eating. I bit my own finger doing that once." Hoyu sat down with them a minute later, with a pile of food he'd very obviously tried to make photogenic. "We've done it. Our first official day of school." "You cute little first years," said Lute. "You're a first year, too," said Hoyu. "Yeah, but I'm a grizzled old veteran first year. I bet you two don't even know which of the toilets on campus have spells and gag flushes on them." Hoyu and Alden exchanged looks. "I feel like we need more details," said Alden. "Absolutely not. It's a rite of passage to figure it out yourself." He looked at Alden's plate again. You finished your burgers. How much fun can you and I have at your expense? What do you mean? As a friend, I should tell you to go get in bed for the night before I drop the debt on you. But, as a friend, I think you should let us observe you a while instead. Is he going to be funny? He's going to be so funny. Lute was grinning. Hoyu looked excited. Line of asterisks. Alden Thorne was pretty sure he'd done it. He'd just become a great roommate. Would a not great roommate let two teenage boys who were laughing like hyenas watch him try to wash dishes when he was in this state? He didn't think so. The feet are more important, he told himself. Pay attention to your balance. He stood firm. The cup he'd been washing fell out of his hand into the small sink and sent soapy water splashing onto the floor. For the third time. What the hell? It came out sounding like Wadle. His tongue now had a disturbing habit of skipping over sounds. He accessed their roommate group chat. Alden, Lute, did you somehow give me a triple dose of this shit? Hoyu was on the floor mopping spills with a kitchen towel they only owned thanks to his mother and her assistant explaining that kitchen towels were a must-have item. Lute was lying on his back on the table, clutching his stomach. They were both howling. Alden, I can't even talk. This can't be normal. It wasn't exactly that he couldn't talk. With careful effort, he could talk, stand up safely, or move his hands the way he wanted to. But doing all three at once was suddenly rocket science. Lute had even insisted on checking the water temperature before he put his hands in the sink. Apparently with this half of the word chain, you could be minimally aware of the fact that you were boiling yourself. IP promise it's only one. Lute gasped. After you finish the dishes, let's try brushing your teeth. Alden, if there's a fire tonight, I'll die. I'll never make it down the stairs. We'd carry you. Hoyu said from the floor as another stream of bubbles slipped over the edge toward him. Lexi, scowling, stepped into the kitchen right then. He was in pajama pants. He crossed his arms over his bare chest. Why are you three so loud, and what did you do too? Hi, said Alden. I'm fine. His arm overshot the drain board by a mile, and a fork clattered across the tile counter. Don't fall. Hoyu shouted. I'm not falling, thought Alden. But Hoyu was on his feet suddenly and Alden was being caught and set upright, so he must have been falling. Lexi walked over to the sink, his eyes wide. Are you drunk? He hissed in Alden's ear. Did you two get him drunk? Yeah, that's it, said Lute. Just look at all this booze we've got lying around. I'm not drunk. I'm just the master now. Probably I'm just not the master of myself right now, was an overly ambitious sentence. He is drunk. He looks just like a drunk person on television. He sounds just like a drunk person. He's not drunk, said Hoyu, trying to square Alden's shoulders from behind like he was straightening an unruly shelf. Or knifing? Alden asked as Lexi leaned toward him and inhaled. Alden, he's sniffing me. Stop it, Lexi. I don't have beer breath. Lute started cackling again. It's a clumsiness word chain, Hoyu said. That's why he sounds fine on the room chat but not with his mouth. It seems pretty strong. Lute gave it to him. Pretty strong? Lexi asked, staring as another tricky fork made a bid for freedom. We aren't letting him wash knives. Lexi frowned. Should you be letting him stand up? Alden, I'm a good roommate. I'm washing all the dishes by myself. Hoyu's keeping you upright. Alden, he's a good roommate, too. Hoyu, thank you. That's not a dish you're washing though. It's the pear you knocked in the sink earlier. Alden looked down to see himself scrubbing the peel off a green pear with the dish brush. He set the fruit aside with as much dignity as he could. Lexi looked at them all, then he sighed and went to fetch the forks. After the dishes, they all three followed Alden around while he attempted to go through his nighttime routine. Equal amounts of teasing and mother-hunting were involved. They wouldn't let him trip over the edges of the rugs, maybe he shouldn't have bought quite such thick ones, and bust his face. But they absolutely all stood there snickering while he tried to get toothpaste out of the tube onto his brush. Don't waste it, said Hoyu as Alden stared down at the tablespoonful of green paste oozing down the sides of the brush onto his hand. Put it all in your mouth. It's not a mistake, you guys. Luke said. He wanted that much. You should have seen what he ate for lunch. Anisiter and social dynamic, said Lexi. Spit goes in the sink. Alden, et tu, Lexi? Why do we randomly say Anisiter and social dynamic to Alden sometimes? Luke asked as he finished brushing. Alden glanced at them all in the mirror. Lexi's expression was neutral. Alden, because I whined about Lexi keeping Anisiter and social dynamics to himself when he knew I was ignorant. I was being a dick. About Luke. He felt even worse about that now. Compared to Lexi? Luke asked. Alden, that time I was. Luke gasped in mock horror. Cool. Anisiter and social dynamic, remember you have to pee before bed. For real. Lexi and Hoyu both looked startled. What kind of word chain is this? Lexi asked for the third time. Line of asterisks. Alden wasn't sure about the lack of bodily awareness being great for sleeping. He might just have been tired after the day he'd had. But he was drifting off easily, right on the brink of unconsciousness, when the notification came in. Video call from 2763rd General View Lart single quote H, Artona connection fee waived. Alden stared at it. Stuart was calling. Early. It shouldn't have been much of a surprise. Alden was up in the middle of the night a lot, and Stuart knew that. But I'm in bed. And my tongue is broken. He reached up and slapped at the switch for the reading light over his bunk. When he finally got it on, he accepted the call with a thought. View Lart single quote H's black hair and pale pink eyes appeared. She was in her cushioned window seat again. The human is very loosey-goosey greater than today, Stu, she reported. He is in bed. Loosey-goosey? Alden was going to have to look into the word that was being translated that way. Did we wake him up? Stuart inserted his face between his sister and the tablet. Did we wake you up? I'm sorry. I called as soon as I got home. I wasn't thinking about the time as much as I should have been. View Lart single quote H gave them both a curious look. It's all right, Alden said slowly in the least loosey-goosey tone he could manage. Think only about the tongue. Only the tongue. I'm on the bad half of a word chain now. Do you mind if we send text messages instead? Or talk in the morning? My mouth, Stuart smiled. Go to sleep. I'll call back later. He means I'll call back later, his sister said dryly. Thank you. Both of you. We can talk all day tomorrow, Stuart. If you want. Night-night. The human just said night-night and hung up on you. And me, said View Lart single quote H in an intrigued voice. Mostly me, since it's officially me calling. He has a name. Stuart single quote H perched on the edge of the lunger beside her. I know. It's your fault for naming your pet after him. Now I don't know what to call either of them. Alden. And? Other Alden. The Rhea single quote T and the other Rhea single quote T. Not confusing in the slightest. She shoved herself back into her cushions. After a moment, she said, Stu, are you alright these days? He sighed. I would be much more alright if you would all stop wanting things for me that I don't want for myself. She smiled. You're still angry with me. I don't know why you thought I wouldn't side with the others. It's only the small matters I allow myself to be careless about. You are not a small matter. One of her hands rummaged under a golden yellow pillow and pulled out one of her long sticks. She held the dark tube out to him, and he lit it with a flick of his fingers. You've always been such a beautiful caster, Stu. He stood. Thank you for calling Alden, he said stiffly. I would appreciate it if you did me the favor again when he has finished resting. I'll do all manner of favors for you, baby brother. She drew on the stick and sent a cloud of blue smoke toward the ceiling. Consider doing just one for me in return.